Hi, today I'm going to talk about HTML forms, and towards the end of this I'm going to talk about integrating JavaScript with HTML forms. So first, let's talk about the history of the web. Early in the history of the web, we had web servers, and they just served up basically poster pages to clients that would request a web page from them. And this meant that as a client, you got to get some real useful information from somebody who owned a website, but the person who owned the website didn't really get to get anything from you. That changed in later years when we had HTML forms, and here's an example of a form that I pulled off of the web. We've seen this oftentimes. You have things like text boxes and drop-down boxes and buttons. And once this was added to HTML pages, it made it so that our interactions with web servers looked a lot more like this, where we would have clients that would request a web page goes back down, and then you fill out that form, you hit submit, and now you've sent something back to the website owner. Suddenly there's a two-way conversation going on, and all kinds of interesting things could be created as a result of this interactivity. One of those, for example, being electronic commerce. You could enter in your credit card number and send back your order, or you could select from a web page all of the things that you wanted as part of your order and tell them that you wanted that. Okay, so there's the high-level idea behind HTML forms and why they're so important. Let's go ahead and get started and build some right now. So open up a code editor like Visual Studio Code. I'm going to just randomly open up a folder on my desktop, and I'll probably pick some very well-used folders since I make a lot of videos. All right, so I'm just going to, having opened up a page, I'm going to click create a new file, and I will call this form.html. And then I'm going to minimize this little side panel and get started. All right, so I just did an exclamation point and hit return. And let me go ahead and just start off with the form tag. So if I say form and end it, and then if I say input type equals text, name equals, and let's have this be a contact form related to our donut company, and we're going to have customers enter in contact information about themselves so that we could add them to our mail list or perhaps allow the customer to create an order. So we'll call this first box first name. I'll write it like that, and then I'll put a line break, and then I'll add another HTML input. This one will be a button. So I'll say button type equals, this time not regular button, but type equals submit. There's actually several types of buttons, and I'm going to show you a couple of those today. And then in here, I'm going to say submit. So I'll hit save, and then I'm going to use my live server extension. So here we go, launching a web page. It will show up in another window, and here it is. And it's showing me a little local IP address for my local computer, the name of the page, and if I enter in some information here, then it became empty. And interestingly, at the top, noticed what it did. It added a question mark, and then it put the name of my form field. It says first name, notice the capitalization there, and then it has an equal sign and then the thing that I entered into that form field. So if I come down here, this right here matches what's in there. Interesting. Okay, now this is going to be a slight deviation from what many of you are able to do, but I'd like to show you what this looks like on the web. So if instead of posting to my local computer, I have set up a web server in another part of the country, and I've set it up so it merely responds to anything that I send in a web form. So I'm going to first type in action equals, and this server won't be up for very long, so you won't be able to test this in the long term. But let me just show you how this works. All right, I'm going to hit save and go back to that page I had open. Let's go back here, reload, type in my name again, hit submit. And here's the page which parrots back everything that's in my web form. So in addition to having the web form field and value here in what we call the query string, I also have it being parroted back right here. And I'm using a language called PHP. You could use as your web programming language on the server side many different things, including JavaScript, which you will see in later videos in this course. But you could also use C#, Java, Perl, C. There are lots and lots of languages that you could use. And all I'm doing is parroting back as many form fields as get posted right there. Okay, and as you saw just a minute ago, if you just strip that out, although you won't see it displayed in a page in this part, you will if you hit submit and you just paste it back to yourself, you will see it show up in this query string up here. Okay, so that's a good start. Let's go ahead and start to add some more things to this. In addition to first name, let's go ahead and add another text box, and this one will be for the last name. So I'll copy that, paste it, do another line break so it looks nice, and I will change this to say last name. Good enough. All right, let's go back to my page back here, and now we see two boxes, and I will type in a first name and a last name, and I will hit submit. And notice in the query string it now has first name equals something, and then there's an ampersand, last name equals something, and then this is where it's being parroted back to the screen. And if I put lots and lots of text boxes into my form, then all of the name value pairs will be separated by an ampersand, and they will appear in this query string as things are currently written. All right, let's continue to augment our page here. Right here, as things are, you can't really tell what you're supposed to type into the text boxes. So let's go ahead and add in some text which tells us what's supposed to be there. The simplest way I could do this is simply to type first name, and over here to type last name, and I'll hit save and then go back to this page, hit reload, and there it is. So this is much more explanatory. I'm going to do something that's not going to change the look of this form right now, but later on it's going to give us some extra functionality, and I'll talk about that at the appropriate time. So I'm going to add a tag here to my form called label, and with autocomplete it's a little bit annoying, but let's go ahead and cut and paste that, and then I'll copy that around last name as well. And when I go ahead and hit save, you'll see in the background that it did absolutely nothing new, and that's okay for now. I have to add in a little bit more to this tag to make it more useful, but we're getting set up for making our form a little bit more usable going forward. Okay, so far we've used the submit button. There are other types of buttons that we could use. For example, we could do button type equals button, and I could say click me. The difference between a submit button and just a regular button is that you need to add an onClick equals attribute to this tag and put some JavaScript in it in order for it to do something. As it is, it just doesn't do anything, whereas the submit button does in fact do something. Another type of button is the reset button. Button type equals reset, and what the reset button does is it makes it so that you can clear out the contents of the form. So let's go ahead and put some stuff in here, and if I hit reset, it gets cleared out. Now, I don't often see people using reset in forms, but it has been available with forms since the very beginning. I suppose an easier way to clear out your form would be to just reload your page if you didn't want anything in there. But nevertheless, it exists, and you'll see it from time to time. Okay, one of the things that you've been noting as I've been submitting my form is that whenever I hit submit, it throws something into the query string. It puts a question mark, and then all of my form inputs appear along with their names and their values. And that type of behavior is known as the method of get. I've never heard it phrased quite like that, but anyway, it's the get method. And if I hit save here and fill this out and hit submit, it does exactly what it was doing before, because whether you put that there or not, the get method is the default way of doing things. If I change this to post, then the magic that's going to happen is that when I hit submit on my form, notice that that information is no longer in the query string, and yet from the programmer's perspective who is running your website, they are still able to see the form fields. So the difference between get and post is that get makes it show up in the query string and post makes it so it doesn't show up in the query string. Now, why would we have both of those? Well, early on in the history of forms, typically we used the get method, and that was really handy in some instances. For example, if you were doing something like a web search on a site like Google or an older version like Yahoo, then when you hit submit with the get method, then all of the things that you were searching for would appear up here, and then you could bookmark that page so that you could always get back to your favorite query results page, and that was good. But one of the downsides to doing things like that is that it also makes it so that URL, that query string, shows up in your browser history. And if you're using a shared computer, that could be a bad thing. Imagine that you're using a computer in the library and you're logging in with a username and password, and the username and password consistently shows up in that query string. So not only could somebody look over your shoulder to see what you had just barely typed in, but they could also look in the browser history and see all the usernames and passwords that are there. And for that reason, we don't typically use post as much, although we still could if we wanted to. Another thing about this is, now this is just specific to this particular programming language, but I'm going to scroll down a little bit into this default output for this particular programming language, and it's got a little area in here where it's capturing the variables being passed in. And this is a variable much like you would see in a language like JavaScript, except there's a convention in PHP where you start a variable with a $sign. You can do the same thing in JavaScript. And this thing looks like an array, and you put into this the name of the form field that was passed. And notice that there exists here a variable called post, and then the specific form fields that were passed in, and here's the values of them. So right now it says post. If I were to change this back to get for a moment, and then come back here, reload my page, hit submit. If I scroll down to that same area again, there it says variables. Notice that now the post variable is gone, but the get variables are there. So programming languages know which type of form post you did. Nice to know at this point, but not critical. Let's go ahead. I'll just leave it as get because it's not really going to matter. Okay, let's move on to another topic, which is the length of your text boxes. So right now, we're using just the default size of the text box. This looks like it's about 25 characters, give or take a few. What if you wanted to make that text box bigger? Well, I could say size equals, and let's make it 50. So I hit save, the page reloaded, and now this is a much longer text box. That doesn't change, if I just keep on typing, it doesn't change how much text I can put in there. It just goes on for forever, basically. But visually, you can change the size of this for different reasons. Maybe in other cases, rather than a name, maybe you just want a four-digit PIN, and so maybe a size closer to 4 would be more appropriate to suggest to the user how much typing they should or should not be doing. Speaking of that, what if you wanted to limit the amount of information that people typed in? Well, one of the additional attributes we have for this tag is max length. So if I go max length, and it went off the edge of the screen there, equals 4. I'll hit save as if I was going to do a pin or something like that. Come back over here. It's still huge, but if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, ooh, it stops me from typing anything. So you have some different ways that you can change the number of characters that get typed in or how big the text box is. Now here's a little something, a little quiz for your brain. Now that you know how to limit the amount of text that people can type in, and you know how to change the size of the text box field to suggest how much people should type in, if you were making a form for a company that captured people's first names and last names, how many characters would you allow people to enter in? How many would you suggest? Well, that's kind of a trick question. For some names in this world, they might have names as long as 50 characters long. So it's going to depend on your organization. And I suppose if you limit the number of characters that people can enter in, then they'll just abbreviate their name if they have to. But that is a little bit of a tricky question, isn't it? The downside is that if you don't put any limitations there, sometimes people will copy in entire books just to see if they can hack your page and do mean things to you. Okay, so that is limiting what you type in. Let's do some other things that are kind of fun. Another attribute that I could put for a text box is required. And if I hit save and reload the page and hit submit, it gives me this little pop-up that says, hey, you should fill this out. So that's a nice little feature if you want to require people to do that. Here's another nice little feature I could put in, autofocus. And if I hit save and I come to the page, notice that whenever I refresh the page, there's already a blinking cursor there. So this is a nice handy feature when you have a page that features a form that always needs to be filled out. So imagine visiting a search engine page, and if they didn't do something like autofocus, that means that every single time billions of people visit that page every day, they have to move their mouse over to that text input box and click before they can start typing something in there, which would be super annoying. So autofocus is a nice little feature to have. Another thing that can be nice is to pre-fill your form. This isn't going to apply in every case, but you can pre-fill the value that should be typed in there. So I'll just type in here something from the Forrest Gump movies. I'll say Bubba as the first name, and the value will be Gump. I will hit save, and if I look over there, it's pre-filled. If I hit submit, it gets picked up over on the other side. So pre-filling is something that you can do. There are other things as well that you can do with text boxes. You can make them so that they're disabled, or that they have some placeholder values that suggest typing something in. There's all kinds of different things that you can do, but we don't need to do anything with that today because that would make the video really long. Speaking of really long videos, let's go ahead and break this in two, and I'll stop here and pick up again in just a moment.